India, infectious disease responses, antimicrobial infection resistance, global governance. She is the author of HIV/AIDS in China and India, Governing Health Security. Her book has recently been awarded the 2017 International Studies Association Global Health Section Book Prize. Her disciplines of interest are health politics and policy, international relations, and today she would be presenting a session on European Union involvement in global health, that is on COVID-19 and vaccine distribution. So over to you now, Catherine. You may begin your presentation, and we hope we will be enjoying the session. And in the end, if there are some questions, we will share it with you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction, and thank you for all your participation for today's lecture. Today's lecture is about EU involvement in global health, especially during the COVID-19 and the role of EU in global health, especially vaccine distribution. Thank you for a nice introduction. I thought I need to do my introduction as well, but just briefly mention like my background. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I did my PhD in Hong Kong as well. My PhD dissertation was about HIV/AIDS in China and India. So by using a securitization framework, my dissertation looks into how the Chinese and Indian governments framed HIV/AIDS as a security issue, and how the framing affects the actual policy responses in China and India. During my PhD studies, I did lots of field works in China and also India to talk to medical practitioners, government officials, civil society groups working on HIV/AIDS. And I really wish to be in person in India, so that we can talk in person. But technology really helps. We can connect to each other, although we can't see each other in person. This is the cover of my latest publication on public health in Asia during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an open access book, and you can download it for free. Anyway, how do we go about today's lecture? We will start off with an overview of the global COVID-19 pandemic. Next, we will zoom in to the EU responses to COVID-19, in particular its vaccine strategy. Then we will look into the role of the EU in global health during the COVID-19 pandemic. To conclude the lecture, I will discuss the opportunities and challenges of the EU leadership in global health. So let me briefly remind you what happened almost 2.5 years ago. The first COVID-19 cases were reported in Wuhan in Hubei province in China on the 1st of December 2019. China reported the atypical pneumonia cases to WHO on the 31st of December 2019, which was almost 1 month after the first local reported cases in China. Around mid-January 2020, WHO reported a case in Thailand in a Chinese woman who had arrived from Wuhan. It was the first reported cases outside China. On the 4th of February, the Japanese health minister announced that 10 people aboard the Diamond Prince cruise ship docked in Yokohama Bay were confirmed to have COVID. All people on board were not allowed to leave the cruise ship and quarantine for 14 days. In mid-February, from China and Asia, the virus reached other parts of the world. On the Valentine's Day, a Chinese tourist who tested positive for COVID passed away in France, becoming the first cases of COVID in Europe. On the same day, Egypt reported to WHO its first case of COVID. The confirmed cases in Egypt was the first case in Africa since the virus was detected in the world. COVID-19 eventually was declared as a pandemic by WHO on the 11th of March 2020. The declaration indicates the severity of the disease. On the 19th of March 2020, China reported no domestic cases of COVID for the first time since the outbreak began. Later on, the total confirmed cases in the US surpassed the number of cases in China on the 26th of March. Since late March 2020, US has become the country having the largest infection number, followed by India and Brazil. So fast forward to today, the total reported COVID-19 cases were more than 522 million, while the death toll from the virus reached over 6 million across almost 200 countries. And if you do a quick calculation, almost 40% of the global infection cases were reported in Europe, the region where I'm now talking to you. During the first year of the pandemic, there was no vaccines available, and therefore non-pharmaceutical interventions, NPIs, were the main measures implemented in countries in the world. So NPIs are actions apart from getting vaccinated and taking medicine that people and communities can take to help slow the spread of diseases like COVID-19. Examples of NPIs are social distancing, school closure, and ban on mass gathering and public events. So NPIs are believed to be the best way to control COVID-19 during the first year of the pandemic. For NPIs can buy time for scientists to develop COVID-19 treatments and vaccines. In normal circumstances, vaccine development is a lengthy process. For vaccines have to go through a 3-stage clinical trial process before they are sent to regulatory approval. And the whole process could take 10 to 15 years. But in the case of COVID-19, in less than a year, more than 150 vaccines were in development worldwide. And as of November 2020, 11 COVID-19 vaccine candidates have entered the final phase of clinical trials before the regulatory approval. And the first COVID-19 vaccine was rolled out in the world on the 8th of December 2020 in the UK. And as May 2022, 66% of the world population has received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, as you can see from the right-hand side of the graph. But then you can also realize that the vaccine distribution is very unequal. You can see in the bottom, only 22% of people in Africa have received at least one dose of COVID-19 vaccines. So today's lecture is about the EU. So we will look into how EU responds to COVID-19 and their vaccine strategy. In the EU, vaccination against COVID-19 started on the 27th of December in 2020, almost 1 month after the UK vaccine rollout. And by the end of August in 2021, EU reached the important milestone of 70% of the EU adult population getting fully vaccinated. As of May 2022, 76% of people in the EU have received at least 1 dose. Regarding the EU vaccine strategy, like other developed countries, the EU ensured sufficient vaccine supplies for EU member states through advance purchase agreements with vaccine producers. The EU Commission, which is the executive arm of the EU, has been in charge of negotiating contracts with the pharmaceutical firms on behalf of the 27 member states. From August 2020 to January 2021, the EU Commission signed advance purchase agreements with 6 companies and secured 2.3 billion doses. That said, there are separate deals carried out by different member states. For example, Germany secured 30 million additional vaccine doses for its own citizens in Germany under a separate agreement with BioNTech. The German deal was sealed 2 months before the EU Commission finalized the EU-wide contracts with Pfizer and BioNTech in November. The German move apparently is a breach of the EU agreements, which prohibit member states from negotiating separate deals. But the European Commission has refused to comment on whether Germany has breached EU agreements. But it is widely believed that the German decision of ordering additional vaccine to its own people could jeopardize the solidarity between European countries. So after the European Commission secured this vaccine, then the EU coordinates approval for vaccines through the independent scientific advice of the European Medicines Agency, EMA. So far, the European Commission has granted a conditional marketing authorization for 5 COVID-19 vaccines, including Pfizer, BioNTech, the Moderna, the AstraZeneca, the Janssen, and also the Novavax vaccine. Apparently, EU member states were among the first countries in the world to receive COVID-19 vaccination. However, the EU has had a bumpy COVID-19 vaccine rollout at the beginning. EU member states complained about the EU Commission, the European Commission, being too slow to approve the vaccines compared to their UK counterparts. In addition, the EU could not receive the amount of vaccines from the vaccine producers that the EU had secured via the advance purchase agreements. For example, in January 2021, supplies of vaccine produced by Pfizer BioNTech were dropped due to production issues. Meanwhile, another major vaccine supplier, AstraZeneca, informed the EU in January that the company will only be able to supply 100 million instead of 300 million doses in the first half of 2021 due to production problems and export control. As a result, some member states decided to work outside the EU vaccine strategy to secure vaccines for their own population elsewhere. For example, in January 2021, Cyprus asked Israel for COVID-19 vaccines, while in the same month, Hungary secured 2 million doses of Russian Sputnik vaccines. And the vaccine rollout in the EU suffered another serious backlash when several studies released in February 2021 that people receiving AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccines had developed a rare type of blood clots that block veins and arteries. So after the report release, more than 10 EU member states, such as Austria, Denmark, Italy, they stopped their rollout of AstraZeneca jab. Although many countries later on taking the AstraZeneca vaccines again after the European Medicine Agency confirmed that the AstraZeneca vaccine was safe, but European citizens have lost the trust of AstraZeneca vaccines. So, for example, according to a poll released in March 2021, which is shown on the left-hand side of the PowerPoint, in France, 61% of respondents said they thought the AstraZeneca vaccine was somewhat unsafe or very unsafe. More than half of Germans also think that AstraZeneca vaccine is unsafe. In both Italy and Spain, the number of people who consider the AstraZeneca vaccine to be unsafe increased from 16% to 43% in Italy and 25% to 52% in Spain. Because of that blood clot incident associated with AstraZeneca vaccine, as well as the company's failure to meet delivery agreements, these have led to the European Commission to prioritize Pfizer-BioNTech over other vaccine candidates. In May 2021, the European Commission signed the world's largest vaccine deal with Pfizer-BioNTech. The contract reserves an additional 1.8 billion doses on behalf of all EU member states between 2021 and 2023. This deal is believed to enhance the central role of Pfizer-BioNTech in Europe's vaccine strategy. After the EU vaccine strategy, in the following part, I would like to highlight two main roles of the EU in global health during the COVID-19 pandemic. I would say the success of the EU vaccine strategy that we discussed before has made the EU becoming a global leader in vaccine exports. Unlike the UK and the US, which in the early phases of the vaccine rollout focused mainly on domestic vaccinations, the EU continued to export half the vaccines it produced, although it did so quietly to avoid a public nationalist backlash at home. In 2021 alone, the EU exported 1.4 billion COVID-19 doses to over 150 countries. But the biggest vaccine recipients have been wealthier countries such as UK, Japan, and Turkey that had contracts with vaccine producers based in the EU. That said, the EU has distributed COVID-19 vaccines to less developed countries via several key mechanisms. And I'm going to discuss those three mechanisms one by one. The first mechanism is the Euc C4 Protection Mechanism. It was established by the European Commission in 2021. The mechanism aims to strengthen cooperation between the EU countries and 6 participating states, including Iceland, Norway, Serbia, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Turkey. On C4 protection to improve prevention, preparedness, and respond to disaster. So in other words, that C4 protection mechanism was not designed only for health disaster. It's also tackle other disasters such as natural disaster like earthquake. But in times of pandemic, EU via the C4 protection mechanism has delivered over 23 million items of personal protective and medical equipment to over 30 countries to support their COVID-19 responses. And via this mechanism, EU also donated 32 million vaccine doses to 40 countries. The second mechanism is the COVID-19 vaccines global access, what we call it COVAX. COVAX is a global initiative aimed at equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines for 92 low and middle income countries via donations. And in fact, COVAX is the vaccine pillar of the Access to COVID-19 Tools ACT Accelerator. The ACT Accelerator is a global corporation to accelerate development, production, and equitable access to COVID-19 tests, treatment, and vaccines. The ACT Accelerator was launched by the Director General of WHO and co-hosted by the President of France, the President of the European Commission, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations in April 2020. Here, we can clearly see the role of the EU in coordinating the development of COVID-19 vaccines, treatment, and test tools. So through this COVAX mechanism, Ghana became the first country to receive COVID-19 vaccine doses. And by mid-January 2022, over 1 billion doses have been delivered to 144 countries via COVAX. And for the EU, out of the 408 million doses, 352 million doses have been shared by the EU via COVAX. And the EU member states also delivered 56 million doses through bilateral donations to its neighboring countries, for example, in the Western Balkans, as part of the European Neighborhood Policy. Sorry, maybe one more point here. So apart from donating vaccines via COVAX, developed countries also donate money in this COVAX mechanism. So for the financing of COVAX, as you all may know, the Trump administration did not involve much in this mechanism because of the American First policy. But then the current US administration reversed the isolatist policy, pledging $4 billion to the COVAX initiative. But before the US involvement, the UK was the biggest COVAX donor in 2020. And then later on, Germany replaced the UK, becoming the largest donor in COVAX before the US later on decided to contribute in this mechanism. And there you can also see the EU and also the EU member states' involvement in not only the vaccine donation, but also financing the vaccine donation mechanism. And for the EU leaders, they have also tried to try other approaches to show their commitment to reduce global inequalities in access to vaccines, as I shown in the previous slide, especially in African continent, only 22% of people are having their first dose. So for the EU, beyond funding the ACT accelerator and donating vaccines to COVAX, EU and member states have highlighted the efforts they are making to help scale up vaccine manufacturing around the world, in particular in Africa. At the G20 meeting in 2021, the European Commission announced the third mechanism, which is Team Europe initiative. And the initiative is about manufacturing and also access to vaccines and other medicines and health technologies in Africa. So this initiative focused mainly on the African continent's access to vaccines. And according to the EU, their plan is to set up hubs for manufacturing mRNA vaccines. So with the support of the initiative, German pharmaceutical company BioNTech announced agreements to establish manufacturing sites in Rwanda and Senegal, and that would involve end-to-end production of mRNA vaccines, meaning that they will produce vaccine in these two African countries locally, and then they distribute the vaccine that produced to the local peoples directly. And apart from the vaccine manufacturing, the BioNTech firm also said that they would eventually transfer its manufacturing capacity and know-how to its local parties, so that African partners could also be independent to produce the mRNA vaccines on their own. They also have a plan to set up and for the plan of setting up these manufacturing hubs, the Rwanda site will begin the construction in mid-2022. And once the construction completes, the facility will have the capacity to produce 50 million doses per year in Rwanda. So I have mentioned these positive aspects of the EU in vaccine distributions. But however, the EU leadership in vaccine export and distribution is not without criticism. In the early stage of the pandemic in Europe, EU has surprised the international community because they set up border controls and export bans on medical equipment. And the EU has been main blocker to block a proposal proposed by South Africa and India in the World Trade Organization to suspend patents for a limited amount of time to scale up production. So in other words, South Africa and India, these two countries, they have the vaccine manufacturing capacities. So they hope that the European vaccine producers could allow them to produce mRNA vaccine without following or bind to the patents. But then the EU member states, they against the idea. And not only the EU, actually UK and Switzerland, they have been the most outspoken critics of the waiver initiative. They argue that waiving intellectual property rights in the short term would not help contain the pandemic. While the European leaders, such as the European Commission President, said that they are open to discuss the issue, but then the European Commission also received lots of opponents in countries such as Germany, because BioNTech is based in Germany. For example, the former Chancellor in Germany, Angela Merkel, says that the protection of intellectual property is a source of innovation and it must remain so in the future. So for the German perspective, they would rather uphold the patents to promote innovation rather than to promote global health in this COVID-19 era. Of course, when German government, they are very much speaking on behalf of the business interest in Germany. So that this is like one criticism of the EU leadership in vaccine export that the EU need to resolve before be claiming as a global leader of vaccine exports. But actually, EU also kind of softened their line, saying that, okay, we don't want to give you others the patent waiver, but countries could implement compulsory licensing, which is a tool enshrined in the TRIPS agreement as a TRIPS flexibilities that countries having manufacturing capacities could impose compulsory licensing to make their own medicines, including vaccines. However, in the previous experience, that compulsory licensing is not favored by many developing countries, because once they impose compulsory licensing, they also receive so-called retaliation from pharmaceutical companies. For example, when Thailand imposed a compulsory licensing on a medicine, and then this pharmaceutical company announced that they are not launching new medicine in Thailand. So for the Thai government, it could be a retaliation of the pharmaceutical companies. And that's make many developing countries, although they know they have the right, they can to use compulsory licensing to manufacture their own vaccines or medicines, but they're also afraid of this retaliation from pharmaceutical companies or from US. Okay, this is the first role of EU as the vaccine exporter during the COVID-19 pandemic. The second role of the EU in global health during the COVID-19 pandemic, I would say the EU is the defender of global health governance. So global health governance describes how global health problems are managed beyond nation states. And in global health governance, World Health Organization, WHO, is the global health governor, and the rule to regulate global health is International Health Regulations, IHR. So IHR, as I said, is the principal legal binding global agreement for addressing the risk of international spread of infectious diseases. IHR is issued under the WHO Constitution and adopted by its 194 member states. The current version actually has been revised several times in the past. The first version is called International Sanitary Regulations, was agreed in 1951. And since then, there has been a number of revisions. The version we were using before SARS was agreed in 1981. The current version was agreed in 2005 and entered into effect in 2007. And that's why we usually refer to the current version as IHR blanket 2005. The current version has a much broader scope of application than that of earlier version, because the earlier version only required member states to report to only 3 infectious disease outbreaks, which are cholera, plague, and yellow fever. And after SARS, IHR were revised to cover all events potentially constituting a public health emergency of international concern. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, the world realized that IHR failed to prevent COVID-19 becoming a global pandemic. Although IHR have all these regulations that regulate state behavior about disease detection, disease reporting, but IHR could not make some countries to share information of infectious diseases outbreak, and IHR could not coordinate the implementation of travel and trade restrictions, despite the WHO not recommend them. And the regulation failed to make countries to follow the other temporary recommendations issued by WHO IHR Emergency Committee. And furthermore, there are some shortcomings of IHR because IHR obligations are heavily tailored towards prevention and also detection of pathogens. And there has been very limited description about how member states should respond to an emerging disease outbreak. And because of the failure of IHR in stopping the COVID-19 pandemic, the European Council President proposed the idea of a new pandemic treaty in 2020. And the European suggestion of having a new pandemic treaty quickly won the backing of WHO Director General and a collection of countries in the global south. And according to the EU officials, because they are the one who proposed the treaty, they envisioned that the treaty would need to have a legal binding element to provide a clear basics for the kind of collective action necessarily to prepare for and fight pandemic. However, we have no idea how the treaty could look like. People also worry that the so-called pandemic treaty might look like the one we had for the climate change, the Paris Agreement, that countries negotiate that treaty for so many years. And they also worry that maybe that would be the same thing for the new pandemic treaty, that we negotiate for so many years, then we only come up with these minimal obligations, and maybe during the negotiation, the next pandemic might arrive. So no one knows how the treaty will look like, but this is expected that a draft text is ready by August 2022. So keep up with the news, then we will see what's happened and how's the treaty look like. But this is a really concrete case to showcase that EU is a defender of global health governance by promoting a new pandemic treaty that could coordinate and respond to disease outbreak better in the future. And not only the problems lies in the treaty, lies in the IHR, the international health regulations. People are also criticized that WHO as the global health governor are not doing their good job. And that's make the EU to propose the idea of the reform of WHO. So what are the criticisms of WHO? As I mentioned before, as a sole global health governor, WHO has received praises, of course, but also criticism in managing global health, even before the COVID-19 pandemic. And one frequent critic is about the WHO delaying the declaration of a public health emergency of international concern, FIC. FIC is a warning mechanism used by WHO. And the WHO Director General, by issuing FIC, could gain additional powers to issue recommendations for how countries should respond to a disease outbreak. Of course, countries can ignore those directives, but such an announcement can increase global attention to a disease outbreak. However, the declaration of fake has been criticized a lot in the past. For example, during the H1N1 outbreak, WHO stated that as many as 2 billion people could become infected over the next 2 years, which is nearly 1/3 of the population. And following the WHO claim, millions of doses of swine flu vaccine had been ordered by many national governments from big pharmaceutical companies. But at the end, millions of vaccine doses were destroyed because the 2 billion people infection scenario did not happen. And people criticize that WHO is, by making this claim, is favoring or beneficial to those pharmaceutical companies. And in the case of Ebola in 2014, a leaked document shows that WHO was intentionally delayed declaring a fake. Critics argues that WHO saw Ebola outbreak as a health emergency to Africa only, but not to the world, in particular to the West. So we can make a comparison here. It takes only 38 days for WHO to declare a fake on H1N1, but it took 138 days for WHO to declare fake on Ebola in West Africa. And of course, in the case of COVID-19, WHO did not declare the outbreak to be a fake until the end of January 2020. If you still remember, on the 23rd of January 2020, the same day, this is the day when the Chinese government announced a full lockdown in Wuhan and 2 other cities. When the Chinese government announced this lockdown in Wuhan, WHO, they had a emergency committee to talk about whether or not to declare COVID as a fake. The committee at the end came to a conclusion that the coronavirus did not yet constitute a fake, and that the extent of human-to-human transmission was not clear. It was despite the widespread reporting of cases across Asia, including Thailand, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Vietnam. It was only when the virus had spread to all provinces and major cities in China on the 30th of January that WHO determined the outbreak constituted a fake. So what happened inside the WHO? Some commentators speculate that WHO avoided declaring a fake right after the Wuhan lockdown because WHO was concerned it would have been perceived by the Chinese authorities as distrust of their capacity to control the disease. WHO officers were also aware that angering China could result in Chinese officials sharing less information with the international community or stopping WHO experts from investigating the origin of the virus. Despite the fact that WHO praised China in public a lot, it had been reported by media that WHO officials, they privately complained that the Chinese authorities were not sharing enough data to allow them to assess how effectively the virus spread between people or what risk it posed to the rest of the world. In addition, there have been accusations that WHO is being influenced by China. One Japanese minister, for example, said that WHO should be renamed as Chinese Health Organization, CHO. Meanwhile, Facebook user renamed the WHO as Winnie the Pooh Health Organization. Winnie the Pooh referring to Chinese President Xi, because the Chinese netizen refer President Xi as Winnie the Pooh because they thought they look quite similar. And critics have also accused the Director General of WHO of serving Chinese interest in responding to COVID-19 because of his personal connections with China, or the Chinese connections with the Ethiopian government. As you might know, the current Director General of WHO, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, was Ethiopian Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2012 to 2016. And during his tenure as Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ethiopia, an electrified Ethiopia-Djibouti railway lines was built by China Railway Group and China Civil Engineering Construction, with the Chinese bank financing 70% of the construction costs. As you can see from the map on top, this line connects to Djibouti, like from Ethiopia to Djibouti. Djibouti housed the first and the only Chinese military base overseas. So this is like one speculation made by commentators that the Dr. Tedros might have served the Chinese interest on behalf of his of the Ethiopian government. Another connection between China and Ethiopia can similarly be seen in the fact that the former Director General of WHO is a Hong Kong Chinese lady, Margaret Chan, supported Tedros in the selection process of the new Director General. Although when I said all these, does not necessarily means that WHO has been so-called influenced by the Chinese government. But in the time of pandemic, and when people trust are not solid, then people are normally create suspicion to the organization. So having all this criticism, what EU has done, instead of walking away from the WHO like what the US did during the Trump administration, Europe has focused on strengthen the collective multilateral system of global health by promoting the idea of WHO reform. And one thing WHO could reform would be the budget, because actually for WHO, its budget is very limited. The amount of WHO budget is equivalent to a hospital in Geneva or a hospital in the US. So how can how can WHO, having that small amount of budget to govern global health? And that's why the German health minister advocates for the increase in the level of assessed contributions. Assessed contributions, I call it membership fee of WHO member states. So if you are part of the WHO, then you need to pay that membership fee, which is assessed contributions. And the assessed contribution is calculated based on the economic development and also the size of the population of the member state. So the EU believe, and also the EU member state believe that by increasing the assessed contributions, by everyone paying more, then the organization can simply do more. So and as a result, the organization WHO might have less influence to one or two particular member states if they have a really strong financial foundation. In fact, not only the EU, the US in the Biden administration also advocate for a greater financial autonomy of the WHO, so that the WHO could be less influenced by all these political factors when dealing with global health issues. But the interesting thing is, this is a very good suggestion by simply asking everyone to pay more to the WHO. But the discussion of increased assessed contributions are not part of the present negotiations on the pandemic treaty that I mentioned before. So one reason is, of course, for the EU, they have a good will to propose the idea, or for these more wealthier EU member states, this is a good view for them to propose the idea of paying more. But then for some member states in the EU, which are less economically developed, they might not like the idea to pay more. Okay, so I think I would like to conclude the lecture by talking about the future developments and also challenges of EU leadership in global health. So for EU, based on my understanding, before COVID-19, EU and also its member states, they always rely on WHO for global health recommendations or advice. But after the outbreak of COVID, EU realized that they need to strengthen their health competency in managing future disease outbreak. So there is a new initiative in 2020 to establish European Health Union, and again to strengthen its responses to future disease outbreak. So I would say EU after the COVID-19 would play an even more important role in global health governance. But then they also experience challenges from their Chinese and Russian counterparts. As you might read from the newspapers that some Western Balkan states, for example, Serbia, they were very supportive of the Chinese donations of vaccines. And even the president of Serbia, he had a big billboard in the capital city with the message, "Thank you, Brother Xi," in praise to praise Chinese President Xi Jinping for donating Chinese vaccines to Serbia, while the EU at that time was still struggling with the vaccine rollout program, as I mentioned in the previous slides. But the funny thing is actually the EU has supported the Western Balkan in fighting against COVID-19, but most of these efforts have gone unnoticed by countries' publics. So I would say the EU lack a positive narrative or an effective communication strategy to let its neighbors knowing that the effort that EU has put in COVID-19 responses. So I think that's all for my presentation, and thank you for listening. And I'm happy to, I'm open to questions from the floor.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. Very interesting. You made it look. And I'm sure there must be some questions coming up. Let me just check into the chat box. So, Celia, can I hand it over to you for Q&A session? Yes, please take over.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. We indeed have many questions from the YouTube and also from our Zoom participants. I think it was a very interesting talk. Also, vaccine nationalism or the distribution of vaccine is something that really was on the media of all the countries. So we all kind of had a popular opinion about it. So I think this made the talk very engaging. The first question we have, it's actually a big question. Why is it so hard to include global health in the foreign policy agenda of the states?
Good question. There is a Chinese saying, 财神跟着瘟神走. In English, the god of plague follow the god of money, meaning that when there is a plague, there will be money. So health, global health is always a lower priority in government agenda. And that's why they would rather put money on other stuff, but not having a good infrastructure or good surveillance system that the disease might not come in 10 years. I mean, in countries in Europe in particular, they have never experienced a pandemic outbreak or an emerging disease outbreak like the region where you and I coming from. Because as a Hong Konger, I experienced bird flu in 1997, SARS in 2003, another bird flu in 2006, and then swine flu in 2009, and then Ebola and Zika. Although it's not something to do with our region, but the thing is, it's nothing to do with Europe. And so, for European perspective, they are very safe. So this is also another reason why, in particular for Europe, the priority, in particular in dealing with infectious disease outbreak, is always lower than non-communicable diseases.
Okay, thank you. The next question is a bit similar. So it's regarding this inequality in the distribution of vaccines and indeed in the amount of people vaccinated. Because the first graphs you shared, I think they were really touching, seeing that actually South America, close to I think 80-90% of people are vaccinated, and in Africa, people that have 2 doses is only 17%. So like we can see that it's a huge gap. So are there some factors that determine the poor vaccine rollout in countries? So I was thinking, because it seems from your graph that it's not to do only with the poverty of a country. So I was thinking maybe it's the privatization of the healthcare system, whether a country is more rural, less rural. Like, are there some proved factors that can explain these inequalities?
You mean in particular in Africa or in general?
Why some countries have been so successful, whereas some others have?
Okay. I haven't touched upon in the lecture, but ironically speaking, in the region where I'm living, people have enough vaccine to vaccinate. But the thing is, there is also an anti-vaccination movement in the region. It's not something to do with COVID, but also before COVID. But COVID also exaggerate the vaccine hesitancy, because people thought that, as I said before, for one vaccine, it takes like 10 to 15 years to get an approval and launch to the market. But how come the COVID-19 vaccine can be done within a year? That makes people suspicious about that. And also the new technology, the mRNA vaccine in this particular, people are not enough knowledge. And you have all these rumors about the government putting a chip on the mRNA vaccine, and then when they vaccinate you, they put a chip in your body. And also people saying that because mRNA, without knowing what mRNA is, RNA, DNA, okay, so that could change my DNA. So this is also why people, in particular, suspicious of the COVID-19 vaccine. So this is what happened in the developed world. And for the developing world, the issue is, for example, also related to the mRNA vaccine, because mRNA vaccine has been proved to be more effective than other traditional form of vaccines. But mRNA vaccine is very fragile. You need to have a really good cold chain system. And in tropical area and in Africa, where you don't have any infrastructure or cold chain storage, even countries willing to ship all their vaccine to Africa, but they just simply can't store it. And mRNA vaccine is so fragile that you really have to have good control during the shipping, and that's all need technology and people knowing how to do things. And that could be another reason of the inequality of the vaccine distribution.
But it's true that I mean, the anti-vaccine movement has been very big in maybe the more developed part of the world, and I think it can go hand in hand with something you mentioned in your conclusion, that the communication issues, for example, of the EU, that in the media always national news absorb EU news, or at least this is how I feel it myself. We have another question regarding actually this EU initiative launched by, I think you mentioned Charles Michel. This new pandemic treaty suggested by the European Council President, is it binding for only EU members or globally? And if applicable to all, how successful was the WHO in implementing it?
Okay, so the EU proposal is for all, is for everyone, but EU is like the defender, like the one who want to preserve the current role of WHO by proposing the idea that if we have a treaty that could strengthen our commitment to global health governance, and also strengthen the role of WHO in managing global health crisis. So this is the idea of where the pandemic treaty comes from. And of course, this is legal binding, but the issue is, just like other international treaties, although it is legal binding, but countries won't get any punishment if they simply don't follow. the regulation. For example, in the PowerPoint, I also mentioned, because for IHR, the current regulations that govern global health, international health regulations, it states that countries having the outbreak need to report to WHO within 24 hours. But for China, it takes like a month for them to report. But we don't see any so-called punishment from the WHO, and WHO does not have the mechanism so-called to punish countries not following the rules. So actually not only China, like other countries also not following WHO recommendations. And again, there are no such punishment. And the thing is, no punishment and also no reward. If I being a good member, I also don't have any reward.
I don't get anything.
So that makes countries, they would prioritize their national consideration more than global health considerations. So, again, if they want to make that treaty, then they also need to implement some mechanism that could stop member states doing silly things, right? If not, then another treaty would not help a lot.
I think you answered to what was the next question, like because you also mentioned the Paris Climate Agreement as an example and how it actually has been a failure in terms of ambition. I think most of the countries have not been up to what they said they would, the targets they would achieve. And I mean, it seems like in all these global governance initiatives, in the end, it's about redistributing. So it's very difficult to ensure that those countries that are on the more privileged side will accept in moments of crisis to maybe donate part of their resources to another country that is less well off. So I find that's in the end a bit of an ethical dilemma. So it's very difficult, as you were saying, and you answered saying that we need a mechanism of accountability and also of rewards, that this is mentioned less often. The last question, I think it's a question for you as an expert in this field. Do you feel that COVID has been a failure for global health, or rather has created opportunities towards achieving global health?
A very difficult question. For Chinese, we believe that every risk is also opportunity. So I would say this is an opportunity and also a risk. As I said in the lecture, we can see the current system again failed, because for IHR, the IHR we've revised several times, but the current version is not working, which is proved by COVID-19. But then the opportunity part is, and also as I said in the lecture, the opportunity part is we realize that the global health threat is real, because as you the first question you ask about the priority of health is always been seen as a second priority thing. So and people cannot imagine how a disease could impact on economy and many other things. So I think after that, after COVID, I really hope that the national government will prioritize health, and in particular in this health infrastructures. As we can see in Europe, although Europe is a very affluent society, but then you can also see the news in Italy, in Germany, people do not have enough negative pressure room, they do not have enough mask, ventilation room is lacking, which is absurd. Why that could be the case, and the reason is very simple, because you don't put enough money at the first place to prepare for the next pandemic.
Thank you very much. I think that was it for the Q&A session. Thank you for answering all of our questions from the audience. And now I will pass on the turn to Meenakshi for the vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you, Celia. Thank you for handling the Q&A session. Before I propose a vote of thanks, I will like Professor Monica wanted to comment on today's topic. So over to you, Professor Monica, before I end the session for the day.
Yeah, I was very much interested, and I thank Katrin very much, because it was absolutely, how do you say, it was excellent, but it gave, a lot of light. It was enlightenment. Everything became very clear. So I want to pick up just a few things which will respond to most of the questions also that, or be connected to the questions that were asked. I pick up first the idea about new contracts and strengthening the World Health Organization around the concept of assessed contributions. Now, I worked on the healthcare systems, but also on AIDS. That was I think what I share with Katrin. My apprenticeship on epidemics was research on AIDS. And Europe was leader then too for the global AIDS policies, which ended up with providing the medicine. So we are very much in a similar case, but we forgot about it because the AIDS research, social science research, it's not all in internet, because we didn't have all these things when that happened. So I want to go back to this idea about assessed contribution. The students who have followed my lessons may remember that I said a decent, efficient healthcare system can only exist if you contribute according to your means and you redistribute according to the need. So this is a very European idea. We have all these healthcare systems which are quite universal, where the quality is quite good, even if everything is not perfect. And I explained this with a lot of details, how we do this. So you pay your contributions according to your income, and you get the money out of the health insurance or the National Health Service in terms of services according to your illness and your need. So this is what we call solidarity. That is a value which is not shared all over the world, not even the Western world. Look into America. And I use this to say health was not the market, it was something else. Even if there were economic actors like pharmaceutical industries, there was something very important which is called regulation, coming from the higher state authorities. Now, with all the talk and convincing talk Katrin gave us, I realized that this is, I realized much more than before that these ideas which come out of the healthcare system experience in Europe for maybe 100 years can be transposed to public health and global health in terms of prevention of epidemics or treatment of epidemics, what we call population health. Because an assessed contribution means nothing else than paying according to your needs and according to your income, population size and economic situation, in other terms, according to your GDP, and you distribute according to the health needs in different countries, be it in Africa or in Japan or wherever. That is very important. And I think I'm not surprised to see that this idea comes from Europe. And I think it was a German who first invented this idea. Assessed contributions, I think it's absolutely strategic if we want a really good global health governance. Now, the second word I wanted to say, and that's, I think, a big thank you to Stefano for this master, because I always felt when you first wrote to me 3 years ago that this master had something very important. Because I think only Europe can give this message to the world. And I think, Katrin, many things you said agree with this. And I agree with your conclusion. Europe will have a bigger role in global health governance, because only Europe can have this role, because we have this tradition of having health as a special value, which is not just a commercial good on the market, something else. And when we say we have to prioritize health worldwide as a global good for all the humans, it means nothing else than what we have in Europe when we say health is very important and people want to be in good health, and we have to pay for it and organize the things around. So I want to give just a few elements why Europe is probably the only part of the world actually today who can do it. because we have the know-how, the epidemic knowledge, industry, pharmaceutical industries, research, we have the money, and we have the values of solidarity and efficiency. You can only have a good healthcare system or good health governance if you have efficient people doing it, people who are competent. So I remember in my course, I said the 3 enemies of a good healthcare system, performing universal healthcare system, is the 3 enemies, I think I called it corruption, unduly profits taken out of the healthcare system, so money that should be in the healthcare system, these contributions taking away in form of unduly profits. I mean, you can have profits. If you invest, you need profits, but it has to be something reasonable, not unduly. So corruption, unduly profits, and incompetency. Now, if you don't have these 3 elements in the global health governance, then you get the situation you have in Africa. There will be the Russians or the Chinese who will take their power ambitions or the economic ambitions, or the Americans with their pharmaceutical economic ambitions, and take away from this global health business, from this global health government, the resources which are needed inside. So I realized, and I thank you very much, Catherine, in your talk, how much what I learned from healthcare systems, the structural basis, applies also to population health in terms of global health governance. And I think really Europe should have the leadership, because we have all the basis, the structural basis, the knowledge, the values, and so on. And there is much less, and we are law states and Rechtsstaaten. So we keep to international law, not like Mr. Putin. So we have all these things you would need to put together to have this global health governance. And I think the European Union is really on a good way. And we have to sort of sanctuarize, take out of the normal power business and normal market business. We have to take out health, because it's something special. It's very, very precious. And we can do it with this knowledge we have constructed in Europe. That's what I wanted to say. And the very last thing, we always say Africa is not vaccinated enough. I really agreed when we said they need AIDS treatment, because they had all the AIDS cases. But is it really true for COVID that they need exactly the same number of vaccines than North Americans or I don't know, Chinese or Europeans? Because there is maybe a genetic factor. I have had some knowledge about, a little bit by accident, about research from people who examine very old genetics from Neanderthals and something like this. And they came out with this hypothesis why Africa had less severe AIDS cases, where there's a climate and so on, but the living conditions in Africa are really very bad for transmitting illness like COVID. They came out with this thesis, or they examined Neanderthal inheritances, which modern men have, except in Africa, because Neanderthal never was in Africa. So if they're African families who have ancestors from Europe or from Japan or from US, then they may have some of this inheritance, but globally, majoritarily, the Africans don't. And all the other continents, we do have, and most of it is in Europe and in Asia. And that explains probably part of the geographic distribution of AIDS, together with aging. So I want to say with this, we even need more basic research in global health, very, very basic research in biology and all sorts of other things, pluridisciplinary research, in order to sort out epidemics, because epidemics also have to do with genetics or with, I don't know, with things people eat or whatever it can be, but there are still things to discover probably, because this research, these people, I think it was in Leipzig, I could give you the reference of their article in Nature. when I exposed this to a few American students who happened to be, most of them Blacks, they aggressed me as a racist. They all wanted to have Neanderthal inheritance. And I tried to tell them, but why do you want to have pre-human inheritance? I mean, you gave the word, the modern man, be proud of it, but they didn't understand. They thought I was a structural racist. And I tried just to explain, to give them some elements of research that may explain why Africa had less severe and less massive COVID than the other continents in the world, because of these differences of just a little percentage of Neanderthal inheritance, which we have and which makes us very, very much receivable for very, very heavy AIDS and to the infection, more infection and more heavy cases. This is what they found out. They tested all this. So this is what I wanted to say, but this story is sort of out of our main talk. So I really wanted to insist on the role Europe has, and we have the means, the knowledge and the values, because there are values attached to all this. It's like peace governance. You know, you can only govern the world with peace and organize peace if you believe that peace is better than fighting. And the same is true for healthcare. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Anyway,
thank you, Monica, for adding another dimension to the thought. Thank you very much. So I would like to offer my vote of thanks to Catherine for today's session. And I'm very glad that you made it look very, very interesting to, I think, all the audience. And this COVID-19 is something which we call it as an ill-structured problem, because it just came up suddenly. No government was ready for it. And obviously, nobody had a clue on how to handle it. Everybody tried doing what was possible. So it was a great learning also. So as there was a question whether it is, a failure or this thing or an opportunity. So I feel it was more of an opportunity because it brought about a lot of solidarity and cooperation between the different nations, and they all handled it together. And I sincerely hope that we learn from this experience, and this pandemic teaches us and makes us better adapted at handling such similar situations in the future. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for joining in. And with that, I would like to end the meeting today. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Monica. And thank you, Stefano, and to all the participants and Elda.
Thank you, Catherine.
Meeting soon next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes.